The aged care sector is on track to become the most dementia-unfriendly part of our society, because more and more what we see is segregated living areas for people with a diagnosis of dementia. So what I'd like to do today with my modest proposal, and as challenging as it may sound, it's better than the original one that talked about eating our young. So this is just a series of brief arguments for reintegrating people in all aspects of life, including formal aged care settings. I have a lot more arguments than this, but I'll try to get through a half dozen or so in the time I have, and I may add or subtract depending on how the clock runs over here. So let's just start with the idea of seeing the person and not the disease, or as Stephen Sabat said the other day through Wendy Moyle, see the person, don't see the patient. I think that this must be, in my mind as a clinician, maybe the biggest misconception in aged care. There are over 100 different forms of dementia. I happen to personally believe that even Alzheimer's may be a final common pathway for many causative factors that can occur. There are many variations, many levels of ability, history, strengths, coping skills, cultures, over 46 million people worldwide, but one type of housing and care? Does that really make sense at all? That we're using something that's really phenomenology, a syndrome that has so many different causes and variations, and saying that people are enough alike that they should have one approach to care. So I want to ask you some questions, and these are just for you to silently answer for yourself. And I'm not suggesting that any of these has a right or wrong answer. You may have some yeses and some nos, but I just want to take you through a little visualization and just ask you a few things. If you are diagnosed with dementia, or if you are living with a diagnosis today, would you like to live the rest of your life in a place that only has other people with dementia living there? Second question, or series of questions, would you want to live in the care home for people with high blood pressure? Or, God forbid, the care home for former aged care administrators? The care home for blank, race, religion, ethnicity? Or the care home, perhaps, for people who had the same school exam score? In that case, I'm presaging my talk about stage-specific living areas. And if you think of any of those places, do you think living in any of those places would have people see you as more or less of a unique individual? And finally, do you think separating people increases or decreases other residents and family members' stigma and fear about the condition? And I think we heard an answer to that from Laura Bowie the other day when she talked about struggling in her small town in British Columbia, and talked about the third floor of the care home there that had the locked ward, and nobody wanted anything to do with the people behind it. And so we understand that sometimes when we separate people, we are actually increasing the stigma instead of decreasing. Now, what about the clinical outcomes? And now, this is where I always go to the Cochrane reviews, if there's one available. They have the best literature reviews around, as you know. And they looked at this back in 2012, and there were no randomized controlled trials. There were many uncontrolled trials. And what they found was no significant benefit to the aspect of separating people with dementia into separate living areas. They saw, as we have all seen, good and bad examples of each, I think. But their conclusion was that there was no strong evidence of benefit, and they said it's probably more important to implement the best practice than to provide a specialized care environment. Now, once again, just to say, there are very good people and good places that provide good care in segregated environments. But my argument is it's not the separation per se that creates the quality care, because I can name just as many good places that don't separate people and provide the same high quality care. This I always have to add, because sometimes this talk offends some people. This is not about bad people. This is our culture change message. It's about systemic and paradigmatic barriers to well-being, similar to what we've seen in institutional care homes that have very good, very caring, very talented people. And as I use the word segregation intentionally, because I come from America, where I grew up during the civil rights movement for people of color in America. And there were also excellent teachers in the 1940s and 50s that taught in segregated schools. They were incredibly gifted teachers. It didn't make separation the right thing. Now, how about these program units, these stage-specific units? Well, there's some problems there. First of all, when you activity program, and I know traditional therapeutic recreation training in the U.S. has you use very deficit-based reductionistic scales like the global deterioration scale, and then prescribe activities based on a score. But really, that driven by score, functional level, or even diagnosis is really antithetical to individualized care. When you name living areas and have dementia care programming and dementia care planning, are you really seeing the individual? That's the challenge when you work in that system. And what happens when you have stage-specific or programmatic living areas is that those who no longer fit the approach end up getting what we call aged out or moved to other areas of the home. And that is also antithetical to the primacy of relationship, which is important in anybody's life, particularly important when people have perhaps difficulty retaining names, forming close, trusting relationships with people. And it's disruptive to many aspects of the person's well-being. Also, what I've found is the most common feature of places that call themselves special care units is the locked door. And a locked door is a locked door. I don't care if it looks like a locked door or a bookcase. It's a locked door. It's a prevention of people getting out. I believe it's staff-centered and family-centered. We say we're keeping people safe, and to an extent we keep them physically safe. But do we create security from emotional, psychological standpoint? Imagine being a person who's in a place where they can't find the door, and knowing that all your life you worried about fire safety, and wondering, how would I ever get out of here if I smelled smoke? Does having a locked door really decrease the person's sense of security, or just ours? That's the real question. And I think it erodes staff's critical thinking skills, because once we know a person can't get out and get lost, we stop wondering why they're trying to leave in the first place. And I have a very simplistic view. Often people who are trying to leave an area are either looking for something that they don't find there, or they're trying to get away from something that is there. And if we don't address either of those things in maybe a more nuanced way, we're never going to stop that. And in my second book, I tell the story of how we actually stop people trying to leave and cut off everybody's alarm bracelets at our greenhouse homes at St. John's now for 4 years by providing the different domains of well-being that they were actually missing when they first moved in there. And I have to ask you this question, because I'm an outdoorsman, I'm an active person when I'm not hurting my leg and limping, and I wonder, how long could any of us last in a locked ward where we could not ourselves independently go outside when we wanted to? Could you make it a day? Could you make it 3 days? Could you make it for the rest of your life? There's a value to diversity too. Stephen Sabat in his seminal book said that being with healthy others creates positive social persona. There are caring roles that are offered to the more cognitively able people, and I see this all the time in integrated settings where people help each other. There are dangers of concentrating people who already have compromised coping skills or stress thresholds. And sometimes we actually see more of this kind of distress spreading among people when there are more people living closely together that have difficulty managing their stress. And universal physical design is something that can preserve well-being through one's changing physical and cognitive abilities. We have the technology and the design capabilities to not move people to better design living areas. But the biggest, to me, the first and last argument is always the civil rights argument. Who else nowadays, besides convicted felons, is barred from living around other people? We've been through civil rights, we've been through LGBT rights, we've been through disability rights, and now we're at the latest forefront. So I want to just take a moment to read a brief visualization that I have in my second book. And what I'd like you to do for this, so I won't choose anything in particular, choose a personal characteristic of yourself. Choose your race, your ethnicity, your religion, some physical ailment or disability you have. Maybe something that's not mainstream, so don't choose being a Caucasian male if you're from America. But think about this, and when I read these statements that we always hear from staff members of homes with people with dementia, apply this to your personal characteristics. Others don't like having them around in their living area. They frighten the other residents, and their families complain. We find this better to move them so they can live separately. They need different activities, a different living environment, and an approach. They won't bother each other as much as they bother other people. We feel they'd be much happier if they are around in their own kind. Does that sound a little bit offensive to you? When we talk about my race, my religion, is it any less offensive to talk about people with cognitive disabilities that way? Now, the biggest pushback I get whenever I give this talk is that the fear and the resistance of other people. And there are many antidotes to fear. First of all, it comes from that not wanting to know what my future might be. And if I don't have to see it, maybe I don't have to think about it. So the first thing is education. Educating people in a positive way about what it means to live with dementia. Destigmatizing, having people, and sometimes when you have to desegregate, you may have to introduce people slowly, bringing them to some activities or some meals so people can start to see them. Maybe teach them about who they've been through their life so they see the whole person. Building relationships, using deep knowing, having well-communicated value-based philosophy. If you would not tell, if you are an administrator and one of your residents or family members says, we don't want black people on our floor, if you would not consider saying, okay, we'll move them, then you should also have the same well-communicated value that says there's the same reason why we're not going to just take the people with dementia and move them to, it is really the same thing to me. And the best thing to combat fear is enlightening practices that facilitate well-being. When people can see another person living with cognitive change who is treated like a full and valued human being, it takes away their fear because they know that no matter what happens to them, they will be valued by the people around them. And to me, keeping people visible and treated in that way is the best antidote to fear. And I remind people that I've worked with who've tried desegregating their memory care units that actually they're digging themselves a hole, because what they've been doing for several years by having that floor is by saying to people, you're right, those people shouldn't be around the rest of you. It's good to keep them separate. And so you actually have a taller mountain to climb if you've been doing that for a long time. So I'll finish with one last question. Segregated memory care is so desirable. Why is there an international movement to create inclusion in our larger communities? And I'll leave you with that, and I'm going to show you a picture from our greenhouse homes I helped open at St. John's. 2 small homes, and these are people who went to the local art gallery. And some of those people are living with dementia, some are not, but they are just on an outing together, and to me this is the way life is meant to be. I'm going to not go where I'm sure Mike wanted me to go to even address whether memory care is a good title for a place where people with dementia live, but I will leave that for another discussion. So I think we have a minute for a question, and thank you very much for listening.